I thought I was flying to Paris to save my marriage, but the moment she opened the door, I knew I was too late. What I saw next changed everything. I never imagined my world could unravel in the most beautiful city on earth. Paris. I thought I was flying there to surprise my wife for the holidays, to make a memory we'd laugh about years down the road. Instead, what I found was the end of everything I thought we had. My name's Jake, I'm 35 and I've been married to Emily for 5 years. She's a pastry chef, still fairly new to the game, but with a knack that's hard to ignore. Watching her work with dough or whip up a ganache, it's like the rest of the world fades away for her. There's a spark in her eyes when she talks about baking, and that passion, that used to be one of the things I admired most about her. From the outside, our marriage probably looked solid. And honestly, I thought it was too. We met through some friends at a barbecue, hit it off right away, and things just moved naturally from there. But in the last several months, something started to shift. At first, it was subtle. Little things. Emily has always thrown herself into her work, and I understood that the long hours came with the territory, especially when she was juggling big orders or experimenting with new recipes. But lately, those late nights became more frequent. She'd walk through the door exhausted, covered in the sweet smell of butter and sugar, but there was something else in the mix. A scent I couldn't quite place. Like perfume but not hers. I didn't say anything at first. She said she was staying late to fine-tune a new pastry collection she wanted to add to the bakery's menu. I wanted to be supportive, so I gave her space. But then more odd things started cropping up. Her phone was always in her hand, she'd smile at messages she never shared, and if I walked into the room, the phone would be face down in an instant. When I'd ask who she was chatting with, the answer was always vague. A coworker or some new baking article she'd found. I tried not to jump to conclusions. We've always been upfront with each other, or at least I believed we were. But there was a shift between us that I couldn't quite name. We could be sitting on the same couch, and yet it felt like we were worlds apart. I chalked it up to stress, maybe burnout. I told myself not to overthink it. But deep down, something didn't sit right. And the more I tried to convince myself everything was fine, the more that gnawing feeling grew. Now that I'm on the other side of it all, I wonder if I always knew and just didn't want to admit it. Then one night, everything took a strange turn. We were having dinner, not saying much, just the usual quiet after a long day. Out of nowhere, Emily looked up with this excited glow I hadn't seen in ages and said, "Jake, I got in." I blinked, confused. Got into what? She could barely contain her joy. Le Cordon Bleu. In Paris. I froze. She had talked about that school before, how it was the dream for any serious pastry chef. It was like the Ivy League of baking. Part of me wanted to jump up and celebrate with her. But the other part, the part that had been sitting in silent suspicion for months, it felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. I asked when she applied, and she told me it was a few months ago, right around the time the late nights at the bakery had started. That hit me hard. She had been planning a move across the world for months, and I was only just hearing about it now? I forced a smile. That's amazing, Em. But why didn't you tell me? She gave a small shrug and laughed it off. I didn't think I'd actually get in. I didn't want to say anything until it was real. I tried to believe that. Really, I did. But it didn't sit right. We were supposed to be partners. If she didn't think she could talk to me about something that huge, what else was she keeping to herself? She kept going, describing the classes, the chefs she'd learned from, the places she wanted to visit. Her eyes lit up with every detail, and for a moment, it reminded me of the woman I fell in love with. But something was missing. Something was off. Then, with that same overly bright smile, she said, "I'm doing this for both of you, Jake. I promise." And in that moment, it hit me, there was a layer of truth she wasn't letting me see. A crack behind that smile. A weight behind those words. I should have been proud. I should have felt hopeful. But instead, I sat there with a stomach full of questions and a silence I couldn't shake. And that feeling deep in my gut? It only grew louder. I was still trying to wrap my head around it all when I asked, "So how long does this program run? I mean, Le Cordon Bleu, that's no small thing, right?" Emily nodded, though her smile dimmed just a bit. "Yeah, it's pretty intense," she said. "It goes for a full year. There's a lot of hands-on work, exams, group projects. And well, it's France. They take it really seriously." She tried to make it sound casual, but to me, a year felt like an eternity. My chest got heavy at the thought. A year apart? That was a long time, especially when things between us already felt shaky. I tried to keep my tone steady, though I think the cracks showed. "And what about me? I can't just up and move to Paris. I've got my job here, responsibilities. How are we supposed to manage this?" She looked straight at me, and for a split second, I could swear she'd been expecting that question. like she already had her response ready. "I get it, Jake," she said gently, reaching across the table and resting her hand on mine. "I've thought about that. I don't expect you to drop everything. I'll be swamped with classes most of the time, but there are breaks. I'll come home when I can. We'll figure it out, I promise." I could tell she believed in this dream of hers, and I didn't want to be the one to hold her back from chasing it. But a year, that stung. "So you'll be flying back during holidays or something?" I asked, trying to imagine how this would actually play out. "Yeah, during the breaks," she nodded quickly. "I already looked at the calendar. I can come home for Christmas, maybe a few extended weekends if it works out. It won't be easy, but it's just 1 year. 1 year, and then I'll come back with so much more to give, to my work and to us." I could see she was trying to reassure me, but the more she explained, the more it sounded like she was trying to talk herself into believing it too. I wanted to be the guy who smiled and said, "We've got this." But deep down, that quiet little voice of doubt was getting louder. She had answers ready for everything. Too ready. And the way she kept repeating just 1 year didn't make it feel shorter. It made it feel rehearsed, like this wasn't something she was figuring out with me, but something she'd already decided on her own. I didn't push her on it. Not yet. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was on the outside of a plan she'd made without me. Eventually, I just nodded and squeezed her hand. "If this is what you really want, I'll support you. We'll find a way through it." Emily gave me a grateful smile, maybe a little too quick, a little too relieved. "Thank you, Jake. This means everything to me." But as she let go of my hand and started talking about her travel dates and how she'd arrange her classes, I sat there quietly, realizing something I hadn't let myself admit before. I knew how much this dream meant to her. What I wasn't so sure about anymore was how much I still meant to her. Time moved quicker than I expected. One moment we were talking about packing, and the next she was boarding a plane to Paris. That last night together we stayed up late and she talked non-stop about the pastries she couldn't wait to master, the chefs she'd meet, the little cafes she wanted to visit. I smiled and nodded and did my best to be happy for her, but the whole time, it felt like I had this weight sitting in my chest. I kept telling myself it was just the nerves. That once she got settled, we'd find a rhythm. The first few weeks weren't too bad. We texted throughout the day and we managed a couple of video calls, though the time difference made it tricky. Emily seemed good, tired but fulfilled, and that helped settle me a little. She'd send photos of the city, shots of her pastries, little stories about how intense the lessons were. It wasn't the same as having her home, but it gave me something to hold on to. Then December rolled around. The holidays were getting closer, and it was going to be our first Christmas apart since we got married. But Emily had promised she'd come back. She even talked about what we'd do when she returned, places we'd go, food she wanted to cook for us. I held on to that promise like it was everything, counting down the days until I could see her again. Then 2 weeks before Christmas she called one evening. The second I heard her voice, I knew something was wrong. She sounded too calm, like she was bracing herself. "Hey Jake," she said. "I need to talk to you about something." My stomach clenched. "What's going on?" I tried to sound casual, but I already had a bad feeling. She paused for a beat and let out a breath. "I'm not going to be able to come home for the holidays. I know I said I would, but the program's more demanding than I thought. We've got another session starting right after New Year's, and I really need to stay here and prepare." It hit me like a slap. "But, you promised," I said, stunned. "We had plans. You said you'd be here." "I know, Jake, I know," Emily said quickly, her voice tinged with urgency, like she needed me to understand before I said anything more. "I didn't expect the program to be this intense. There's so much packed into every week, and if I fall behind now, it'll be impossible to catch up later. I promise I'll make it up to you. Maybe I can come home in February once things settle a bit." February. That word felt heavy in my ears. I had been clinging to the idea of Christmas, us spending it together like we always had. I kept thinking it would be our anchor in the storm, a small reminder that even though we were apart, we still had something solid between us. And now, even that was slipping through my fingers. "But it's Christmas, Emily," I said, my voice softer than I meant, almost pleading. "You said you'd be home. Are we really not going to spend even one holiday together?" There was a long pause and I could hear her exhale slowly on the other end. "I'm sorry, Jake. Truly. I hate this too. But I have to focus right now. This program is so important to me. It's just one Christmas. We've got so many more ahead of us." I wanted to say it wasn't about the holiday. It was about everything else, how distant she'd become, the late responses to texts, the way our conversations had started to feel like obligations instead of connections. I wanted to scream that I was losing her one day at a time. But I couldn't bring myself to say it. So instead I swallowed hard and muttered, "Yeah, okay. I understand." She must have heard the hurt in my voice because she kept talking, trying to fill the silence. "We'll video chat Christmas Eve. I'll send you something special. Maybe it'll feel like I'm right there." Almost. That word hung in my mind long after the call ended. It was a word people used when something wasn't quite real. Almost didn't bring warmth to a quiet apartment. Almost didn't fix the silence. I kept telling myself I was being overly sensitive, that Emily was just under a lot of pressure and things would calm down soon. But as I sat alone that night, staring at the Christmas lights we'd strung up together before she left, a deeper fear started to grow. This didn't feel like a rough patch. It felt like a slow unraveling. The days before Christmas crawled by. Every time I looked around our place it felt emptier. The couch where we'd snuggle during movie nights. The kitchen she used to fill with the smell of fresh bread. I was starting to wonder if this distance was becoming permanent, not just physical but emotional. That's when I decided, I couldn't just sit here and let the space between us grow. If she couldn't come home, I'd bring home to her. Maybe she just needed a reminder of what we had. Maybe we both did. So I booked a last-minute flight to Paris. It drained my savings and stressed me out more than I'd admit, but I didn't care. She was worth it. I knew where she lived, a little studio not far from the school. She'd shown me pictures when she first moved in, even joked about how tiny the place was. I could still picture her in that little kitchen, laughing as she tried to squeeze her baking tools onto the narrow shelves. I didn't tell her I was coming. I wanted it to be a surprise. I imagined showing up at her door with my suitcase and a goofy Santa hat, and her laughing, hugging me tight, tears in her eyes from the shock and joy. I thought, maybe, just maybe, that moment could fix everything. The flight felt endless. The closer we got, the more my nerves took over. What if she was too busy? What if I was intruding? But I pushed those thoughts aside. I had to try. Paris was glowing when I arrived. String lights draped across the streets, cafes bustling with warmth. It was beautiful, almost dreamlike, and as I made my way to her apartment, my heart was pounding harder with every step. I reached her building, climbed the narrow staircase and stood in front of her door, trying to steady my breath. From inside I could hear faint sounds. Music maybe. Movement. I knocked gently and waited, heart racing. At first there was nothing. Then footsteps, slow and hesitant. My chest felt like it was about to explode from anticipation. The door opened and there she was. Emily stood in front of me, her expression frozen in disbelief. Her hair was tousled, her face slightly flushed, and she was wearing something I'd never seen before. A delicate lingerie set, laced, ribboned, far too revealing for an ordinary evening at home. It didn't take a genius to figure out this wasn't meant for me. All the words I'd been practicing vanished from my head. My mouth opened but no sound came out. I just stood there, staring at the woman I thought I knew, and realizing in an instant that everything I'd been afraid of was real. We stood there for what felt like an eternity, just staring at each other. Her eyes went wide and in them I saw everything: shock, panic, and unmistakable guilt. Time seemed to stretch thin, like my brain couldn't fully catch up to what my eyes were seeing. This wasn't the Emily I had flown halfway across the world to surprise. No, the woman standing in front of me looked like someone I didn't recognize. "Jake, what are you doing here?" she finally asked, her voice trembling, shaky like she knew she'd been caught. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I stepped past her, my pulse hammering, the air feeling heavy around me. I didn't know what I was expecting to find, but part of me needed to see it, to confirm what my gut had feared for weeks. And there he was. Sitting on the edge of her bed was a man I'd never seen before, half-dressed, wearing nothing but boxer briefs and a ridiculous Santa hat. His eyes widened the moment he saw me, and for a second neither of us moved. It was this frozen moment, like a strange pause in reality. Him, me, and the silence screaming louder than anything either of us could say. Then something inside me snapped. I didn't think, I just reacted. I grabbed him by the arm and yanked him to his feet, nearly sending him tumbling. "Get out," I growled, my voice loud and raw. He scrambled to grab his clothes, his eyes darting between me and Emily, but I didn't let him pause. I shoved him hard toward the door. I said, "Get out." He managed to grab a shirt, his shoes, and maybe his pride on the way out, but I didn't give him time to speak. I forced him out the door, slammed it shut, and stood there in the middle of that tiny apartment, shaking from head to toe. My fists were clenched, my chest was heaving, and I felt like my entire body was burning. When I turned back, Emily was still standing there. Her mouth slightly open, eyes full of panic and tears, like she couldn't believe what just happened. Like she hadn't brought this all on herself. "What is this, Emily?" I shouted, my voice cracking under the weight of it all. "What the hell is going on?" She flinched, and for the first time I saw the mask slip. Whatever confidence she had when she opened that door was gone. She looked small, cornered. But I wasn't ready to hear apologies. Not yet. I needed the truth. I couldn't stop shaking. I had played this scene out so many times in my head, knocking on her door, seeing her face light up, hugging her tight and forgetting all the miles between us. But instead, I was standing in the ruins of that hope, staring at a woman I no longer knew. "Tell me," I said, my voice lower now, full of pain I couldn't hide. "What is this? What are you doing?" The room was silent except for our breathing. She looked around like she wanted to run, but there was nowhere to go. She opened her mouth to speak, then shut it again. I watched her try to find the words, but nothing came out. Finally she whispered, "Jake? I can explain." "Explain?" I snapped, my voice rising. "You're standing here in lingerie I've never seen before, with some guy in a Santa hat in your bed, and you want to explain that? You think there's a version of this story that makes it okay?" She looked like my words physically struck her, but I didn't care. I had flown across the ocean for her. I gave her my trust, my patience, my support. And this is what I walked into? "I came all this way for you, Emily. I thought maybe, just maybe, we could find our way back to each other. And this is what I find." Her eyes filled with tears, but I was beyond the point of being swayed. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," she said, barely audible. "I didn't plan for it to happen." "Then what did you plan?" I asked, my voice sharp. "Because you sure had everything else mapped out. Staying here over Christmas. Keeping secrets. Was this guy just some fling to keep you company while you pretended to be too busy for me?" She shook her head quickly, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "No, Jake, I swear. I've been working hard, the program is brutal. I didn't expect this. It got out of hand." I let out a bitter laugh. "Out of hand? You've been feeding me lies for weeks, maybe longer. And now I walk in and see this? How long has this been going on, Emily? How long have you been pretending?" She didn't answer. Her mouth moved like she was going to speak, but nothing came out. I could see it all in her face. The guilt, the shame, the weight of the truth she couldn't bring herself to say. And that's when it hit me. Whatever her story was, the truth was probably worse than anything she could admit. And I stood there, wondering when exactly I lost her, or if I ever really had her at all. I took a slow step back, the weight of what I just walked into crushing me like a ton of bricks. "Do you love him?" I asked quietly, barely able to get the words out. I never imagined I'd have to ask my wife that. Saying it aloud felt like tearing open my chest with my bare hands. Emily looked at me, and for a moment I saw it: remorse, fear, and something that looked a lot like shame. "No," she said quickly, shaking her head. "No, Jake, it's not like that. I don't love him. I swear. I was just lonely. I made a mistake." "A mistake?" I said, my voice rising. "You think this is a mistake? Forgetting your keys is a mistake. This," I motioned toward the bed, the room, the whole damn situation, "this is betrayal. You blew up our life because you were lonely?" She stepped toward me, reaching out like she wanted to pull me back into something that no longer existed. "Please, Jake," she said, her voice cracking. "I know I messed up, but I can fix this. We can fix this." My chest tightened like it was caving in. I could barely breathe. "Fix it?" I said, almost laughing through the ache. "How, Emily? You want to sweep it under the rug? Go back to pretending everything's fine while you carry on with this side story you started without me?" "No. I'm not doing that," she shouted suddenly, the panic rising in her voice. "I don't want to lose you. I made a terrible mistake, but I still love you." I shook my head slowly, stunned. "Love me?" I repeated. "How do you say that while standing in front of me, half-dressed, after I just caught you in our bed with another man?" She didn't answer. Because there wasn't one. And that silence, heavy and hollow, said more than any excuse ever could. "Then tell me," I said, barely above a whisper, my voice raw. "Why? Why did you do it?" Her lips quivered as fresh tears filled her eyes. I don't know," she murmured. "I got scared. Everything felt so overwhelming out here. The pressure, the distance. I didn't plan any of this. I felt alone and I acted without thinking." I stared at her, feeling like I'd left my body behind somewhere. "You know what's overwhelming?" I said flatly. "Getting on a plane, flying across the ocean just to find your wife in bed with someone else. That's overwhelming." She didn't respond. She just stood there, crying, finally beginning to grasp that there was no undoing what she'd done. There was no version of this where things snapped back into place. And I knew that too. Something inside me shifted in that moment. It wasn't just the pain, it was the betrayal that kept echoing. She hadn't just cheated, she had tossed aside everything we built like it was nothing. She reduced our marriage to a lie she could rewrite when it suited her. And standing there, watching her come undone, I stopped caring about her tears or her regret. She'd made her choice. Now it was my turn. I could see her trying to say something, but I didn't care anymore. Whatever it wasn't going to fix this. I turned and walked out without a word, my mind already racing. I didn't want revenge. I wanted her to understand what it felt like to be crushed. I wanted her to feel the silence, the emptiness, the disbelief, everything she left me with. That night, I booked a room at a hotel across town. I needed to cool down, but more than that, I needed to figure out how to make her feel this. Not for a moment, but in a way that would stick. I lay in that cold bed for hours, playing everything back in my head, every lie she told, every late night that now made sense. And that's when the idea came to me. Cruel, yes, but real. Honest in the way her actions had never been. Step 1 was simple: make her believe I was still fighting for us. The next morning I sent her a message. Told her I needed to talk, that I wasn't sure what to do, but maybe, just maybe, there was still something worth saving. She didn't reply right away, probably unsure if she even deserved the chance. But a few hours later she agreed to meet. When I showed up at her door, I wasn't the broken man from the night before. I was calm, cold, focused. "I've been thinking," I said, keeping my tone steady. "And maybe we can try. If you're honest with me. I need everything, Emily. No more lies." She hesitated, but eventually she opened up, at least what she thought was everything. She cried again, said she was lonely, that he was nothing more than a temporary escape, that it never meant anything. She was so desperate to be believed that she couldn't see I wasn't really listening. I was watching her, learning her every move, planning what came next. Over the next few days I kept up the act. I sent texts, told her I missed her, said we could take it slow. She clung to that hope like a life raft. She believed we'd come out stronger, that forgiveness was within reach. She had no idea what was coming. Step 2 of the plan was already underway. The night I walked into that apartment, I'd done more than just catch her. I'd taken a photo, just one, but it said everything. Him, standing there in nothing but a Santa hat, caught mid-motion, panic written all over his face. That one image held the weight of the truth she tried so hard to hide. And it was going to be the key. It didn't take me long to find out who he was. Paris might feel big when you're lost in it, but it's small when you know where to look. Emily had left a trail, names she'd mentioned, little details from texts. Within a day I had his full name, where he worked, even what he did. Once I had that, I wrote a message to his employer. I attached the photo and explained, politely but clearly, that this man had been involved with a married woman, and had used his workplace connections to make it happen. I wasn't sure if they'd fire him, but I knew it would stir things up. And that was good enough. But that was just the beginning. The real blow was aimed at Emily. She had poured herself into this opportunity, bragged about it, worked for it. Le cordon bleu, her dream. Her ticket to something bigger. And now it was going to slip through her fingers. I spent the better part of a day composing a letter, posing as a concerned husband. I kept the tone calm, formal, respectful, like I was coming from a place of deep disappointment. I included the same photo. I detailed how my wife, a student at their elite institution, had used her position and the school's reputation to build inappropriate connections. I made sure to mention there were multiple men involved, fabricated or not. I didn't need it to be fully true, I just needed it to raise enough doubt, enough concern to spark a scandal. And then I took it even further. Her parents, God, they loved me. Always had. They thought their daughter was building a legacy, becoming someone to be proud of. I sent them the photo too. With one line, "This is why Emily won't be coming home for the holidays." And just like that, the pieces were in place. I went back to my hotel, laid down and waited. The next morning it started. Emily texted me, panicked. Her message was frantic. Something about a call from the school, a meeting they'd scheduled, and how she didn't know what was happening. A few minutes later, another text. Her parents were blowing up her phone, asking what she'd done, demanding answers. She sounded scared, confused. I didn't reply. I let the silence speak for me. I let her sit in the chaos she'd created. I watched her texts come in one after the other, pleading, apologizing, begging me to talk to her, to help her make sense of it. I just stared at the screen and turned it off. Was it cruel? Yeah, probably. But in that moment I didn't care. She made her choice. She had broken us, and now she had to live with what came after. By the next morning I was done. I packed my bag, checked out of the hotel, and headed to the airport. Paris was stunning, no doubt. But for me, it had become a cold stage for the end of everything I thought was real. I booked the earliest flight home and sat in the terminal, watching the messages pour in. All from Emily. Each one more desperate than the last. I didn't respond to any of them. The flight home felt endless, but for the first time in days I felt still. Not healed, far from it, but grounded in what needed to be done. As soon as I landed, I called a divorce lawyer. No waiting. No second guessing. I wanted everything set in motion immediately. Emily had burned the bridge. Now I was making sure it never got rebuilt. But there was one last thing. Emily's culinary training wasn't just her dream. It was funded by the company she worked for back home. They had a scholarship program for their top employees, and Emily had been one of the stars they chose to invest in. She had always spoken about how proud she was that they believed in her. She never stopped talking about how much it meant. And I knew exactly how to use that. I spent the next few days pulling everything together. Screenshots of our messages. Emails where she talked about how exhausted she was from studying, while I now knew she was spending nights with someone else. I attached the same photo. Him, the hat, the panic. But this time I framed it differently. In a composed, professional email to her company's HR department, I introduced myself and explained calmly that I was her husband. I explained how her actions during her time in Paris had not only devastated our marriage but had undermined the investment the company had made in her. I outlined how she had used their funding to live out a second life, misrepresenting her priorities and compromising the integrity of their scholarship. I didn't embellish too much. I didn't need to. The evidence, combined with the context, was more than enough. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about consequences. She had used my love, my trust, and everyone else's belief in her as a stepping stone, and I was done watching her walk on people like that. She wanted a new life. She just never thought the cost would be everything she had built to get there. Finally, I attached the photo. It felt like a low blow, I won't lie. But by that point, I didn't have any space left for guilt. It was the truth. They had every right to know exactly who they were pouring their support into. For a second, I hesitated. Not out of doubt, but out of habit. There was still a part of me that remembered who Emily used to be. The woman I married. The woman who once looked at me like I was her whole world. But that version of her had vanished long before I ever boarded a flight to Paris. That version lied to my face and asked me to love her anyway. So I hit send. Then I closed the laptop, leaned back in my chair, and let out a breath I didn't even realize I'd been holding. I knew it wouldn't take long. Her company was big, respected in the industry, and I seriously doubted they'd want to be tied to anything even resembling a scandal. I figured they'd pull the funding. Maybe even cut her loose completely. That scholarship, that golden opportunity she bragged about? It wouldn't survive the fallout. The next morning I went about my day. Got dressed. Grabbed coffee. Drove to the office. But everything felt different, lighter somehow. I knew things weren't done yet, but for the first time I saw a way forward. My life had been turned upside down, but I'd stopped waiting for someone else to fix it. The anger was still there, sure, but underneath it was something new, clarity, control. A sense that I wasn't powerless anymore. When I got to work, I decided to go through with one final step. Emily's company had always been proud of her. They even reached out to me once, asking if I'd be open to helping with a marketing campaign. They wanted to showcase how their employees were making an impact abroad, a feel-good piece with Emily as the centerpiece. At the time, I had been honored. Proud even. Now that pride felt hollow. I pulled up their site. Her face was still there, beaming, radiant, all dressed in her white chef's jacket, with a headline about passion and perseverance. I stared at it for a long minute before sliding the photo onto a USB drive. I printed a copy too, and on the back I scribbled a single line, "The truth about your investment." No return address. No explanation. I mailed it straight to their corporate office. I had no idea how they'd respond, but I didn't need to know. A picture like that? It spoke louder than anything I could ever write. A few days passed. I stayed quiet, didn't reach out to her. I figured by now the dominoes were falling. And then, just as I was sipping my morning coffee at work, my phone buzzed. It was an email from someone I knew, an old friend from the PR team at her company. Just 5 words. "You're not going to believe this." They were cutting ties, pulling her funding, starting a full internal review. In other words, she was done. I just stared at the screen for a second, letting it sink in. It was over. I had unraveled every lie, torn down every facade. And I didn't feel an ounce of regret. Later that day, I leaned back in my chair and looked out the office window, watching the city move around me. For the first time in weeks, I felt still. There was peace in the quiet. The divorce was moving forward, clean and smooth, just how I wanted it. I had worked closely with my lawyer to make sure there were no loopholes, no second chances. I wasn't interested in working things out. I wanted a clean break, and I was getting it. Emily's career? Gone. She was sent home from Paris not as a rising chef, but as a warning story. A cautionary tale of how fast things can fall apart when you burn the people who believe in you. I imagined her sitting alone in that cramped apartment, suitcase packed, phone full of unanswered calls, trying to make sense of the wreckage. Meanwhile, I was moving forward. I picked up new projects, started planning a solo trip, something I'd always wanted to do but never had the time or space for. I started going out more. Laughed with friends I hadn't seen in years. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't walking on eggshells, waiting for the next excuse or the next lie. Then one afternoon, I was sitting at my favorite cafe, coffee in hand, when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. But something in me said to pick up. Jake, can we talk? Emily. Her voice was thin, shaky. Like she was barely holding it together. I could hear the panic behind her words, the sadness, the fear. She wasn't the confident woman I used to know. That person was gone. This was someone on the edge, someone who had watched their life collapse in real time. I stayed quiet. Please, she continued, I know I messed up. I lost everything. I don't know what to do anymore. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I let the silence stretch for a moment. Then calmly I said, there's nothing left to talk about, Emily. You made your choices. Now you have to live with them. Her voice cracked. I don't have anyone. I don't know how to start over. And for a split second I almost felt something. Not sympathy. Just something. But then I remembered what she'd done. I remembered standing in that doorway, suitcase in hand, heart in pieces. You'll figure it out, I said, and I meant it. Goodbye, Emily. I hung up. Set the phone down. Took another sip of coffee. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about peace. I walked out of that cafe into the afternoon sun, and for the first time in a long time, I felt its warmth. I didn't know what the future looked like, but I knew this. I had survived the worst of it. And what came next? That was mine to shape. Emily would have to live with the fallout. And I'd live free of it. I walked on, steady and sure, and behind me, I left the ashes of the life she chose to burn.